She was the daughter of a hero. He, an unforgivable criminal. Two worlds that should never have met, but couldn't resist. Between cold interviews and heavy silences, a forbidden desire was born. A love doomed from the start, because sometimes the biggest prison has no bars.
Serena's life had always been a parade of crisp uniforms, polished medals, and fiery speeches. She grew up in a house that was more than a home. It was almost an extension of the police force itself. The walls displayed portraits of her father in different stages of his career. The young recruit smiling as he entered the academy, the man with impeccable posture on graduation day, the decorated commander at official ceremonies. Each frame carried not just pride, but a silent demand, as if reminding her, at every step, of the duty to live up to that last name. From an early age, she learned to live by rules. Bedtime was dictated by the precise chime of the wall clock. Mornings, by the echo of her father's firm footsteps, always ready for another day of service. To him, discipline was the essence of life, and he passed it on with the same rigor he used to train his subordinates. There was no space for weakness, excuses, or vulnerability. Serena was expected to be strong, exemplary, correct even, when she was just a little girl who wanted to laugh too loud, get dirty in the backyard, or cry for no reason. As she grew, the rules didn't fade. On the contrary, they became more subtle, more invisible, but just as suffocating. Her way of dressing, her tone of voice in public, her circle of friends. Even the books she read, everything seemed to pass through the silent filter of a father who, without words, demanded perfection. Her mother, though gentler, echoed her husband's expectations, repeating that it was all for Serena's own good, that this was how character was built. Serena learned to smile at the right moments, to carry herself at social events like the model daughter, to politely accept compliments she never asked for. She became the picture of a good girl, studious, disciplined, seemingly happy. But behind the facade there was a restlessness growing like a shadow dot at night. Staring at her ceiling, she often felt an inexplicable weight. It wasn't just the pressure of meeting her father's expectations. It was the sense of living a life that didn't belong to her, as if each step had been drawn for her, but by someone else's hands, as if her existence was merely a reflection of the glory of the city's hero, and not a story of her own. Family conversations rarely touched on dreams or desires. They spoke of discipline, safety, concrete and stable plans. When, as a teenager, she hinted at studying art, her father's silence was heavier than any shout. She quickly abandoned the idea and chose psychology, not out of passion, but because it sounded respectable. A career serious enough not to disappoint, but broad enough to get lost in the eyes of everyone. Her life was flawless. A diligent university student, discreet, with a promising future. But there was an emptiness she couldn't name, a constant fatigue, as if she carried invisible chains. Friends said she was privileged, the daughter of a respected man, raised in a solid family. And she only smiled, unable to explain that sometimes being the daughter of a hero meant never being allowed to be just human. It was as if she wore an invisible uniform, sewn with expectations and obligations. Even at college parties, where classmates gave in to freedom, Serena remained contained, as if her father's shadow was always right behind her, judging every move. The flashing lights, the loud music, the laughter around her, all felt distant, as if she were watching her own life from the outside, unable to truly surrender to anything. Deep inside, there was a thirst she couldn't quite understand, a desire to break rules, to feel her heart race for reasons other than fear or pressure, a curiosity about what lay beyond the safe, proper walls of her life. But whenever the impulse grew stronger, the memory of her father's stern eyes pulled her back. She was a prisoner in an invisible cage, not built of bars, but of pride and expectations. A gilded cage, filled with comfort and perfect appearances, yet still a prison. And Serena was beginning to realize there was no easy way out of that labyrinth. What disturbed her most was the silence of the house at night. Her father, always away on long shifts, left behind a trail of authority even in his absence. Her mother resigned, followed her mechanical routine, and Serena, alone in her room, felt as if the whole world expected her to be strong, immaculate, untouchable. Little by little, the idea of freedom had become a dangerous, nebulous dream. She didn't know exactly what she wanted, perhaps just to live without the constant weight of a surname she never chose. Perhaps just to breathe without imagining someone was judging the sound of her breath. Being the daughter of a hero was, paradoxically, to carry the mark of a burden. And at that point in her life, Serena had no idea that the true prison wasn't her father's imposed discipline, but the secret desire beginning to grow inside her. A desire that would soon take its most dangerous shape. The presence of a man who defied every rule she had ever been taught to obey. The car slid into the gray parking lot of the maximum security prison as if the very air around it weighed tons. Serena stepped out, clutching her folder tightly against her chest, fingers cold despite the late morning sun. The guards' beige uniforms stood out in the watchtowers, weapons in plain sight, eyes sharp. It was her first time crossing those gates, and the feeling was that she was entering a world that didn't belong to her yet. Now, she would be part of it. The night before, Her father had sat at the table with the same posture he held during official ceremonies. His deep voice carried pride, but also command. He said he admired her choice, that seeing his daughter in the field of criminal psychology was a sign of strength. But he did not hide the warning. This is not an environment for the weak. You are not weak, Serena. Never forget that. In here, anyone who hesitates has already lost. His words now echoed in her mind like a mantra, but instead of giving her courage, they only added more weight to her shoulders. The first gate opened with a metallic groan that pierced down her spine. A guard led her through narrow corridors, where the smell of rusted iron and strong disinfectant mixed with the sound of boots echoing on the cold floor. Each step seemed louder than it should, announcing her presence in a place where any weakness could be read as an invitation. The gates shut behind her one by one, creating a claustrophobic effect. The world outside dissolved as she sank deeper into that concrete labyrinth. The hallways were lit by white lamps that cast harsh shadows on the walls, amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. When she passed the first cell block, the stairs hit her like arrows. Men of all ages, each with the same hungry gaze, some with anger, others with curiosity, others with something she dared not name. Voices rose in whispers, laughs, muffled taunts. Serena kept her eyes fixed ahead, chin raised, trying to ignore the fingers tapping the bars, the murmurs slithering through like snakes. Her heart was pounding, but her face had to remain unreadable. She remembered her father's advice, never show fear, and that's what she tried to replicate, even as sweat trickled down her back beneath her blouse, even as each step felt like an invasion of her own body. The guard, a stocky man with a curt tone, explained the basic protocols. He said her role would be to sit in on interviews, assist with psychological reports, observe behavior. But the way he spoke, barely glancing at her, made it clear he didn't trust her presence. It wasn't just she who felt out of place. The prison itself seemed to reject her delicacy, as though her figure clashed against the brutality around her. Crossing the inner yard, she noticed the barbed wire fences enclosing the space. The open sky above felt like a cruel irony, freedom within sight, yet impossible to reach. The inmates there raised their eyes in unison, as if the mere sight of a woman crossing that ground was a spectacle. The guard quickened his pace, and Serena followed, trying to steady her breath. They reached the administrative wing, where the walls were cleaner and the doors bore steel plates with bureaucratic titles. There, a senior psychologist greeted her with a tired smile. She was a middle-aged woman, hair tightly pinned in a bun, plain clothes. Her handshake was brief but firm. She explained that this internship would be hard, that Serena would see more than she could imagine: pain, manipulation, violence. She also warned her to learn how to separate truth from games. Since many inmates were masters at lying, Serena listened attentively, though her mind drifted back to the images of the cells and the stairs that still seemed to follow her. The place wasn't just oppressive, it was almost alive, as if every wall breathed threats. She was then taken to the room where she would spend part of her work from then on. A small space with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror hiding surveillance. Everything was cold, calculated, designed to expose and observe. Walking in, she felt the weight of silence. The room seemed to wait for something or someone. The guard explained that today she would only observe, that she wouldn't need to speak or act, just watch an interview conducted by the senior psychologist. Serena nodded, though inside, anxiety grew restless. Who would be the first man to sit in that chair across from her? What would be the first voice to break the silence? While she waited, her eyes wandered across the details of the room. The scratches on the metal table, old and deep, reminded her that nothing here was neutral. Every inch carried stories of confessions, manipulations, power plays. The sound of keys rattled outside. Serena's heart raced. It was only the beginning, but she already knew this internship wouldn't be a simple academic exercise. It was a plunge into a dark universe, built of chains and secrets, where nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The door opened. The guard stepped in first, and behind him came the clink of chains. Serena held her breath. The first inmate appeared, downed with him. The first proof that her life was about to become forever entangled with a world she might never escape. The door opened. The guard stepped in first, and behind him came the clinking of chains. Serena held her breath. The first inmate appeared, and with him, the first proof that her life was about to become forever entangled with a world she might never escape. He entered slowly, his steps marked by the metallic sound of shackles, his head held high, his posture upright, as if no iron bound him at all. There was a silent insolence in the way he occupied the space, and it caught Serena's attention before their eyes even met. He was tall, fair-skinned, with short-cut black curls, and a flawless face, features that seemed sculpted by hand, a strong jaw, firm mouth, prominent nose, a gaze that refused to yield. But what struck her most were his eyes, light brown, with an intensity almost impossible to endure. He was the embodiment of everything she had ever heard about dangerous criminals: firm, cold, unshakable. And yet, the shock cut through her like a sudden blade, because, beyond all that, he was beautiful, brutally so, cruel even, as if his beauty was part of his armor. It wasn't a gentle charm, but something intimidating. a presence that demanded attention. Serena hated herself instantly for her reaction. How could she even think that? How could she, even for a second, find attractive a man whose life was marked by crime, by violence, by a darkness she could never comprehend? She forced herself to look away, focusing on the notebook pressed against her chest, as if the gesture could erase what she had just felt. As the guard led him to the chair across from the table, she noticed the space seemed to shrink around him. The silence grew heavier, and Serena struggled to keep her face neutral. Inside, though, she felt vulnerable, almost fragile, as if he had stripped away a part of her she had never offered to anyone. When the session ended, he was led back through the narrow corridors. The echo of his steps and chains lingered in her ears even after the door closed. Serena took several moments before standing. Her breathing was shallow, her heart racing. It was ridiculous. He was just a prisoner, a man like so many others she would encounter during her internship. There was no reason to feel this way, and yet, that night, lying in bed, she found his image vivid in her mind. Those brown eyes returned, haunting her. No matter how she tried to push them away, they followed her like an invisible mark the next day. Serena was called in by the senior psychologist. It would be just another routine observation, they said. She was to sit behind a professional, watch the session, and learn from the experience. Simple, objective, without any involvement. But when she entered the interview room and saw who was waiting, the air caught in her throat. It was him, the same man from the day before, the dangerous prisoner, cold, sharpened, arrogant in his presence. He sat at the table, wrists still shackled, yet his posture was so firm it seemed as though he commanded the room. Serena positioned herself in the corner, trying to look discreet. She clutched her notebook like a shield against the tension consuming her senses. The psychologist began with formal questions, routines, habits, perceptions of the environment. He answered calmly, his deep voice filling the room, and with every response, his eyes drifted from the professional to rest on Serena. It wasn't a fleeting glance, like someone merely acknowledging another presence. It was direct, constant, as if to remind her he knew exactly the effect he caused. Serena tried to keep her composure, but every time she felt those eyes fixed on her, something inside her trembled. It was as though he could pierce through all the walls she had spent her life building. Her father's rigidity, the discipline that shaped her routine, the silence where she buried her own desires. The psychologist seemed not to notice, or perhaps she was simply used to it. She continued with her questions, noted down his answers, kept her tone steady. But for Serena, every exchange of words became an invisible field of tension. There was a charged silence between each question and answer. He took his time, as if savoring it, fully aware that everyone in the room waited for his voice. And when he answered, his gaze always ended on Serena, as if the interview were a performance and she, its true audience. She tried to look away, tried to hide behind her notes, but it was no use. She felt exposed, seen more than she should be. A dangerous fascination began to stir against her will. It wasn't passion, not even conscious attraction. It was something visceral, a magnetism that unsettled her, as if some part of her recognized in danger a strange kind of freedom. When the session ended, the guard entered again, locking the chains back in place. The man stood slowly, unhurried, without lowering his gaze, and just before leaving, he turned one last time toward Serena. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just looked at her, long enough for the silence in the room to become almost unbearable. After the door closed, Serena remained frozen, fingers digging into her notebook. The psychologist merely commented on the inmate's posture, on how he tested the limits of whoever observed him. "You need to learn not to be shaken by these games," she said. Serena nodded, unsure of her own voice, but deep down, she knew it wasn't just a game. His gaze didn't feel rehearsed. It was deeper, as though he had chosen her, specifically, to pierce through, that night. Serena returned home consumed by thoughts she didn't want to have. His face kept appearing, those brown eyes burning in her memory. She felt ashamed, confused, torn between her duty to be strong and the irresistible sense that, from that encounter on, her life would never be the same. And for the first time, she realized that the fear she felt wasn't of the prisoner himself, but of what he awakened inside her. Serena couldn't erase the image of that gaze from her mind. The night had been long, disturbed by thoughts that wavered between duty and a personal unease she didn't dare name. The next morning, determined to push aside what she considered weakness, she went to the prison's archive. She needed to see his file. She needed to remind herself clearly of who she was facing. The folder was heavy, filled with yellowed pages, stamps, and reports that coldly detailed what had shaped that man. Homicide. The word appeared in bold letters, followed by the description of a brutal crime marked by sudden violence. Below that, illegal possession of firearms and association with criminal groups, a stained history, leaving no room for easy redemption. Serena kept her eyes fixed on the words, repeating to herself that she was facing a criminal, someone who should never stir anything in her butt. Professional caution. And yet, she couldn't suppress the shiver that returned at the memory of the way he looked at her, as if the file didn't even capture half of what was inside him. Hours later, the time for her first formal interview arrived. Her hands were cold, her heartbeat quick. She took a deep breath, trying to wear the mask of neutrality she had learned from the senior psychologist. It was just a job, a collection of information, nothing more. The room was the same, a rectangular table, 2 chairs facing each other, bare walls that seemed to shrink around whoever sat inside. When the guards brought him in, the metallic clatter of chains echoed again. He entered with the same posture as before, upright, defiant, as if even the room itself was too small to contain him. Serena kept her eyes on the papers in front of her, trying not to let the tension show. She began the protocol. Simple, objective questions. Full name, age, family history, past relationships. As she jotted down his answers, she struggled to keep her tone impersonal, as if ignoring the overwhelming presence sitting across from her was even possible. He responded calmly, unhurried, his deep voice filling every corner of the room. There was no nervousness, no hesitation. With each answer, he seemed to measure her reaction, searching for cracks in the walls she worked so hard to build. And then, little by little, the direction of the conversation began to shift. He didn't just answer, he asked questions back. About her life, about what had brought her there. Serena tried to deflect, reminding herself of the boundaries she had to keep. What he insisted, not aggressively, but with a disarming naturalness, as if it was impossible not to invert the roles. "You're a cop's daughter, aren't you?" he guessed, as though he had figured it out without needing confirmation. Serena froze for a second, stunned by his precision. He wasn't waiting for answers, only observing, attentive to every tiny movement she made. There was nothing in the files about her family, which meant he had really been paying attention. Maybe he had overheard something in the corridors. Maybe it was just intuition. Whatever it was, the unease grew heavier. He revealed little about himself, but the little he shared was layered, fragmented stories, stray details, nothing that directly answered the questionnaire. Instead, he offered small confessions absent from any official report, as if deliberately choosing only what might unsettle her. Serena knew it was a trap, yet she couldn't escape completely. With every note she scribbled down, she felt less in control, as though she were the one being interviewed, not him. At one point, he casually remarked about the prison corridors, how certain doors always creaked the same way. A trivial detail, yet the way he said it made Serena shiver. It was as if he was describing not just the place, but the suffocating feeling of being trapped there. She realized then that he didn't need many words. The intensity of his stare, the calculated silences between sentences, they were enough. Everything about him was designed to disturb, to invade spaces that should remain untouched. Serena tried to tighten her tone, steering back to technical questions. Educational background, health conditions, he answered, but always circled back, turning the conversation another way. He asked what she thought of working there, if she believed in rehabilitation, even if she was afraid. That last question forced her to breathe deeply. She didn't answer. She just wrote it down, feigning indifference. But deep inside she knew he had hit the mark. Because yes, there was fear, not of him but of what he awakened inside her. When the guard came in to end the session, Serena felt her body relax for the first time. He rose slowly, still bound by chains, and before leaving cast her one last look. There was no open provocation, only something unspoken, as though he knew she would keep thinking about him long after he was gone, and he was right. That evening, Serena stayed in the room for a few minutes, staring at her notes. The answers were all there, but they said nothing. The papers recorded facts, numbers, dates, but failed to capture the essence of what had happened. The real encounter lived beyond the margins of the report. She knew she had to learn how to handle this, to build stronger walls, to protect herself from the fascination threatening to take root. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the strange thrill flooding her, as if, for the first time, she was facing someone who didn't see her as the flawless daughter of a hero, but as a woman with cracks, hidden desires, and silences no one else had ever noticed. Serena shut the notebook hard, trying to convince herself it was nothing but manipulation. He was a criminal. Her job was to study him, to understand patterns, not to get lost in them. But as she left the room, she still felt the weight of his stare, and she knew, with disturbing clarity, that this would not be just another interview. The weekend felt endless. Serena forced herself to bury her mind in studies books scattered across her desk, unfinished reports demanding focus. But with every page she turned, the same thought returned, insistent. His memory, that steady gaze and disarming calm, rose like a ghost she couldn't banish. She tried to rationalize. He was just a prisoner, a dangerous man, a mind that needed to be studied, nothing more. And yet, whenever she closed her eyes, she saw with sharp clarity the way he looked at her, as if he could pierce through her skin and reach what lay beneath her rigid facade on Sunday night. The family dinner followed its usual ritual, the table set by her mother, the smell of spices filling the house, the silence that always preceded her father's questions. Seated at the head of the table, he carried the same aura of authority as always. Between bites and casual remarks, the inevitable question came. He wanted to know how her internship at the prison was going. Serena drew a deep breath, hiding the turmoil rising to the surface. She answered briefly, describing only the basics, the routine, the reports, the discipline required, nothing that could reveal the restlessness consuming her inside. Her father seemed satisfied, nodding firmly, proud to see his daughter following the same rigid path he had always preached. He told her to stay that way, not to let herself be shaken. For him, being there was more than learning. It was also a test of character. Serena smiled, but the gesture was hollow. Inside, the words she didn't speak weighed far more than his praise. When Monday arrived, the weight of the prison wrapped around her again. Cold walls, damp corridors, the metallic echo of doors locking behind her. Once more, she prepared to face him. The interviews followed a strict schedule, and that day, it was her turn again. He entered the room with the same presence as before. Chains at his ankles, wrists cuffed, yet no trace of submission. He sat as though he owned the space, as though even physical restraint couldn't diminish the aura of power he carried. Serena began with a protocol. Simple questions, formal records. But before she could go far, he took the lead. "You're a cop's daughter," he said calmly, as if he already knew the answer. Her heart skipped, but she held her composure. She confirmed it without looking away and added that it meant she wasn't someone he should play games with. The words came out firm, almost reflexively. For a moment, silence lingered. Then, he smiled, and that smile meant to be a threat only made him more striking. Serena hated herself for noticing. The contrast between the harshness of the situation and the sudden lightness of that gesture disarmed her in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't have to push hard for the conversation to take another direction. With every answer she gave, came a question from him. They weren't obvious questions, nor related to crime or his record. They were personal, subtle, as if searching for cracks. He asked what books she read, what she did to unwind. He asked if she ever got tired of always following the rules. Serena tried to keep her shield up. She gave short, clipped answers, but realized that between defenses, she let slip more than she should. A phrase here, a detail about her routine, an unconscious gesture. Little by little, she was revealing herself. It was as if the interview had become a silent game. Who was analyzing whom? She knew her role was to study his mind, map behavior, organize reports. But she felt that with each meeting, it was he who studied her, as if knowing her better with every passing minute. The pen between her fingers grew heavier. With every note she wrote, Serena wondered if she was truly recording his data or if, without realizing, she was letting him record hers. Time devoured the session. When the guard came in to end it, Serena felt a mix of relief and frustration. Part of her wanted to leave, to catch her breath. Another part wanted to stay to dive deeper into that minefield. As he stood, the smile returned subtle like a silent promise. Serena averted her eyes, trying to convince herself it meant nothing. But when she gathered her papers, she realized her notes hadn't captured the essence of what had happened. The facts were there, yes, but the real record was etched only inside her, dot in the corridors. On her way out, the prison seemed longer than ever. The echo of his chain still vibrated in her mind. For the first time, Serena realized she might not be as in control as she believed. Perhaps without meaning to, she was already being led by him, and in that moment she understood the real danger. It wasn't just his criminal record that unsettled her. It was the feeling that, each time their eyes met, an invisible bond tightened and she didn't know if she'd have the strength to cut it. The days in the prison followed almost the same pattern, repetitive, oppressive, heavy. But for Serena, every visit to that interview room carried something new, something that unsettled her more than she wished to admit. It was as if the minutes she spent in front of him turned into a succession of loaded silences, stares that spoke louder than any phrase. When she heard the chains again, the sound no longer seemed threatening. It was almost an announcement. He was coming, and that alone made her hold her breath. He sat before her, posture upright, brown eyes fixed like a blade. Serena opened her notebook, trying to maintain professional composure. "Let's continue where we left off," she said, her voice firm though her heart raced. He tilted his head slightly, as if playing with his own silence before replying. "Always so proper, always with the pen in your hand." A slow, dangerous smile crossed his face. "It seems like you need to hide behind questions so you won't lose yourself." Serena pretended not to be shaken. "It's my job. Job or shield." He left the question hanging, and the silence that followed clung to her skin for a moment. Serena felt the weight of his stare and shifted her gaze to the file on the table. Better to follow the script. "I want to understand. Why did you step into that world?" The question came out firm, but inside, it carried a true curiosity, something beyond the professional. He leaned his arms on the table, looking directly at her. "No diversion. No mask. I had no choice." His voice was deep but honest, almost cutting. "If I didn't do what I had to, I wouldn't even be alive right now." Serena wrote it down, but the motion was automatic. Inside, the impact of the words made her tremble. "And do you regret it?" she asked, not realizing her voice had softened. He didn't hesitate. "No." His brown eyes glimmered with something intense. "It was my life, or his, and I still wanted to breathe." The words fell between them like a sharp blow. Serena felt a chill run down her spine. "And you?" he asked, breaking the silence. "In my place, would you have done differently?" The question hit her hard. Serena opened her mouth, but nothing came. She felt exposed, unable to form a single answer. He smiled again, not mockery this time. There was something almost satisfied in seeing her speechless. "I thought you were strong," he murmured, leaning back in his chair. Serena swallowed, closing her notebook. "I am strong. I'm just not used to answering questions, only asking them. Maybe that's why I like playing with you." His tone was low, yet charged with intent. She looked away, trying to hide the heat rising in her cheeks. The air in the room felt thicker, suffocating. That night, alone in her room, Serena tried to convince herself it was nothing more than a psychological game. But when she closed her eyes, his image returned like a living shadow, his brown eyes staring at her, his crooked smile, his sharp words, and against her will, she dreamed of him. The dream was intense, almost tangible. She stood before him, the chains falling to the ground as if they had vanished. His strong hands touched her waist, his lips drawing closer, warmth flooding her skin. Desire consumed her in silence. No questions, no barriers. Serena woke with a jolt, heart pounding. She lay staring at the ceiling, a bitter guilt pressing against her chest. How could she dream of him? How could she feel something like this for someone who embodied everything she should reject? But the more she tried to push the thought away, the more it returned. It was as if he had infiltrated her uninvited, taking over spaces she hadn't even known existed. The next day, facing him again, Serena tried to regain control. She opened her notebook, scribbling words she barely registered. He noticed her unease, and a curious glint lit his eyes. "You seem different today," he said, almost amused. "Are you dreaming of me, doctor?" Serena froze. The question was a provocation, yet it felt like an invasion, like he had stepped into her mind. "Don't be ridiculous," she shot back quickly, snapping the notebook shut. He laughed softly, never breaking eye contact. Silence answers better than any word. She took a deep breath, trying to fight the feeling that he saw further into her than he should. But there was something she could no longer deny. He attracted her, not just for the danger, but for the way he dismantled her, as if he held the key to unlocking every layer she had built throughout her life. In that room, Serena realized something even more disturbing. She wasn't just observing him. He was observing her with calm, patience, and a veiled fascination. And so, between questions and silences, between harsh truths and subtle provocations, something was born that could no longer be ignored, a silent, uncontrollable, dangerous desire. The routine at the prison felt heavy, but Serena was beginning to realize that the hardest moments weren't within the iron walls, they were inside her. One morning, the psychologist in charge of the sector called her into her office. She was an older woman, with a firm expression but a gaze that radiated experience and understanding. "Serena, I need to tell you something I've noticed," she began after a few seconds of silence. "The prisoner, Ethan, he seems to show a certain interest in you." Serena raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Interest? I don't think so, doctor. He's like that with everyone, isn't he?" The psychologist smiled faintly, as if she had heard that defense many times before. "No, he's not like that with everyone. Believe me, I've worked with him long enough to notice when something falls outside the norm." Serena looked away, uncomfortable. "Even if you were, it doesn't matter. He's an inmate, and I'm just here to learn." The older woman leaned forward, resting her arms on the desk. "I know that, but it's precisely because you're learning that you need to be careful. These men, they know where to strike. And sometimes, when barriers start to dissolve, when primal instincts emerge, it's easy to lose yourself." The words echoed inside Serena as if spoken within her. She fell silent, trying to understand why it affected her so much the next day. After much reflection, Serena knocked on the psychologist's door and asked to speak again. She sat in front of her fingers, restless in her lap. "I need to be honest," she finally said. "From the first moment I saw Ethan, I was surprised. I didn't expect him to be like that. So beautiful." The word came out as if it were forbidden. "And I feel attracted to him. It doesn't make sense. I know it's wrong, but it's there, and I can't just ignore it. For someone like me who's always followed all the rules, feeling this is uncomfortable. Strange." The psychologist observed her calmly, without judgment. "What you feel is not uncommon, Serena. There's a phenomenon in psychology called hybris. It's the attraction to people who have committed crimes, especially when it involves figures of power or danger. Of course, I'm not saying you have it pathologically, but the logic is similar. The forbidden, the dangerous, the one outside the rules exerts a special fascination on someone who has always lived within them." Serena widened her eyes, surprised by the explanation. The psychologist continued, with a light smile. "Also, let's be honest, even though he's a criminal, there are worse ones. And frankly, Ethan is too attractive. I'd even say it's a crime he's in prison." Serena couldn't suppress a laugh, relaxing slightly. "Maybe I just need to sleep with someone else to make this go away for good." "Maybe," the psychologist replied, joking as well. "But in the meantime, be careful. Knowing you can talk to me is already a start." Serena left the office feeling lighter. It was the first time she allowed herself to speak about it out loud, and the feeling of having someone to hear and understand her was almost liberating. That in the following days, however, she decided to avoid direct contact with Ethan. She stayed behind the observation mirror, watching the interviews conducted by the psychologist. He answered calmly, firmly, but always, after each sentence, turned his gaze to the glass. And in those moments, he smiled. A subtle smile, loaded with provocation, as if fully aware that she was there, trying to hide from him. That gesture unsettled her even more. It was as if he was saying, "You can run, but I will still find you." Trying to escape the growing obsession, Serena accepted an invitation from some college friends to go out. It was Friday, and they went to a lively bar. The music, the laughter, the light conversations, everything seemed like an attempt to give her back a piece of the normality she was losing. She drank more than usual, laughing along with the group. One of the guys, with kind eyes and an easy smile, approached her more clearly. They talked, exchanged playful provocations, and when they left, he invited her for a ride. Serena, carried away by the alcohol and the need to forget Ethan, accepted Dot in his car. The kisses started hurriedly, full of repressed desire. His hands explored her waist, her neck, and she reciprocated mechanically, as if trying to extinguish the fire Ethan had ignited inside her. But suddenly, in the midst of the embrace, Serena saw him differently. The features of her companion seemed to blur, and for a moment, she saw Ethan, his brown eyes. Enigmatic smile, suffocating intensity. She gasped, startled, pulling away immediately. I can't. The guy looked confused, trying to understand. Did I do something wrong? No, it's not that. I need to go home. Now, he tried to insist, but Serena's firm gaze ended the situation. She got out of the car, took a taxi, and left, her heart racing. Alone in her room, she sat on the bed and ran her hands over her face. The weight of guilt and confusion crushed her. What is happening to me? It was as if Ethan had infiltrated her mind, her body, every part of her, even away from him, even trying to replace him with another face. He remained. Serena began to wonder if she was going insane, or if life had simply decided to play a cruel joke. But one thing was clear. No matter how much she tried to escape, Ethan was becoming more present with every passing day, and that terrified her. Serena spent days trying to deceive herself. She repeated like a mantra that it was all just a phase, the shock of experiencing a prison for the first time. If she pretended none of it mattered, if she resumed her technical posture, perhaps the confusion in her mind and the intensity in her body would simply dissolve. That was what led her, on a stifling morning, back to the interview room. As she pushed the heavy door, she felt the old mixture of butterflies and the urge to flee, but she maintained her posture. The sound of the chains echoed, and soon after, Ethan entered. He raised his eyes, and upon seeing her, a surprised smile appeared on his lips. A smile different from the others, less calculated, more genuine. Serena felt something stir inside her, but she masked it. She lowered her head, adjusted the papers, and pretended not to notice anything. "I thought I wouldn't see you again," he said, in an ironic tone, as if it were merely a joke. She took a deep breath before answering. "I need to finish your file." Ethan leaned slightly forward, his gaze fixed on her. "So I'm your homework." The phrase, spoken with a calm provocation, caught her off guard. Serena tried to ignore it, pretended to jot something down, and kept her voice firm. "Let's continue," she said, straightening her posture. "Last week you mentioned that. Where have you been these past days?" He interrupted, his voice low, almost intimate. She lifted her eyes, unsettled. "That's not relevant." "It is." His gaze pierced her. "You watched me from behind the mirror, didn't you?" Serena's heart raced. She felt the heat climb up her neck. "That's not part of this interview." She forced a professional tone, though her hands trembled subtly. Ethan smirked at the corner of his lips. "You didn't answer." She tried to resume the technical questions, but he kept diverting the focus, always cornering her. "What did you do that was so interesting out there?" he insisted. "You must have a full life. Friends, family, maybe a boyfriend." Serena gripped her pen tightly. "Let's go back to the report." Ethan, then it happened. Without warning, he extended his hand, handcuffed over the table, and covered hers. The contact was brief, but enough to paralyze Serena. The shock of warm skin against hers made her entire body shiver. Before she could react, the door opened. The guard entered. "Alert. Is everything all right here?" he asked, eyes narrowed. Serena's instinct was to pull away, but her voice came out firm, almost automatic. "Yes, everything's fine." The guard hesitated but left shortly after. Closing the door behind him, the silence left behind weighed more than the bars. Serena slowly withdrew her hand, feeling her blood pulse through her veins as if she had run miles. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "That was extremely stupid of you," she muttered, quieter than she would have liked. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. "I don't have much to lose. I'm already in prison." She bit her lip, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to scold him, part wanted to surrender to the whirlwind he stirred inside her. Then, as if trying to regain control, she said firmly, "This will be the last day we see each other." There was a moment of silence. He raised his eyebrows, then smiled again, a slow, dangerous smile. "I hope that's not true." His voice sounded almost like a whisper, but full of conviction. "It's too annoying when you're not around." The sentence pierced her like a sharp blade. She swallowed hard, feeling her body tremble inside. She knew she should stand up, end the interview, put a stop to the thin line separating them. But she didn't. She stayed there, holding his gaze, aware that she had already lost part of her control, and deep down she feared she wouldn't be able to maintain it much longer. The following days were an exercise in resistance. Serena kept her distance from Ethan, determined to keep her word. She avoided the interview room, refusing any opportunity to see him. The psychologist's understanding didn't insist. She recognized the signs of what was happening and, far from judging her, considered it right for Serena to step back before crossing irreversible boundaries. But Serena's mind didn't obey her. It was as if there were two versions of herself: the exemplary daughter, raised under her police father's rigid rules, and the restless woman, consumed by an uncontrollable curiosity for this dangerous man. Sometimes, in the silence of her home, reports blurred with memories. Every word she read seemed to bring back the sound of his voice, the intensity of his brown eyes, the way he smiled as if he knew secrets about her she didn't even know herself. Serena convinced herself that keeping away was the right choice. She repeated it every day, but it was enough to close her eyes for a few seconds to feel again that magnetic force pulling her toward him. One ordinary afternoon, she was alone in the small prison office, reviewing old papers and reports. The mechanical routine gave her a fragile sense of control, until she heard 3 knocks at the door. Before she could respond, the doorknob turned, and the door opened. Ethan entered. Serena's heart raced. She jumped from her chair, papers scattering across the floor. He closed the door behind him in silence, the metallic sound of the latch echoing like a sentence. "I don't have much time," he said, his deep voice filled with urgency. Serena instinctively stepped back. "What are you doing here?" Her voice faltered in the middle of the question. He advanced slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "Answer me first. Are you afraid of me?" The words hung in the air, heavy. Serena swallowed hard, unsure how to react. Her feet retreated until they touched the cold wall behind her. "I don't know," she finally answered. Ethan smiled, as if he had predicted her response. He came even closer until the warmth of his body mixed with hers. His gaze was intense, almost hypnotic, studying every detail of her face. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, his fingertips brushing the stray strands of her hair, slowly descending. "At least, not that kind of fear." Serena held her breath. Every gesture seemed calculated to invade, dominate, occupy every space of her being. "You have no idea what's happening to you, do you?" he said, laughing softly, as if he had just deciphered something she was hiding from herself. His fingers traced her face until they rested on her lips. For a moment Serena closed her eyes. The touch was warm, firm, charged with forbidden intimacy. Ethan slowly traced the contours of her mouth with his fingertips. Then, in a bold move, he pressed a finger between her lips, forcing them apart. Serena didn't react. Her entire body seemed paralyzed, caught between the repulsion of danger and irresistible fascination. Her breathing quickened, and she let out a fragile, almost inaudible sound. He bit his own lip as he watched her yield. The tension between them became unbearable, as if the air itself was about to ignite. Ethan leaned toward her face, and for a moment Serena believed he might kiss her. Then came a knock at the door. The abrupt sound tore them from the trance. Serena pulled away, gasping, her face burning. Ethan, on the other hand, stepped back, but without losing his calm. The smile returned to his lips, slow, insinuating. "Want to see me again?" he asked as if he already knew the answer. Serena hesitated. Her thoughts begged her to say no, but her body, drawn by the invisible magnet he represented, betrayed her reason. She only nodded a timid, almost imperceptible yes. Ethan smiled, satisfied, as if he had conquered something precious. He opened the door and left without haste, but not before casting her one last glance, a look of complicity, as if silently saying that, from that moment on, there was no turning back. Serena remained against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Her body still trembled, her mouth burned as if she still felt his fingers, and her mind spun in circles between guilt and desire. In that moment she understood she was already trapped, not by the prison bars, but by the invisible chains Ethan had cast over her, and the worst part was admitting that, in some way, she had allowed it herself. The entire week had been torment for Serena. Since their last encounter, she couldn't shake the feeling of his skin against hers, the invasive and daring touch that had left her paralyzed. The imagined taste of his finger on her lips returned in flashes, as if her body had recorded it in a way that could never be erased. Guilt and desire waged a battle inside her. "How did I let this happen?" she repeated mentally, as if asking the question could neutralize the fire burning in her chest. But the more she tried to convince herself it was wrong, the stronger the memory became, invading even the most mundane thoughts of her day. On the morning she knew she might see him again, she lingered a few extra minutes in front of the mirror. A little mascara, a light lipstick. Ridiculous, she muttered to herself, but didn't wipe it off. Deep down, she knew she wasn't getting ready for anyone else. The day passed with anxiety gnawing at her bones, Every knock on the door made her heart race, only to be crushed by disappointment when it was any face but his. She pretended to concentrate on reports, but the letters danced on the page. Every minute, she expected Ethan to enter, and every minute she had to deal with his absence. When night fell, the emptiness became almost unbearable. She returned home frustrated, feeling pathetic for waiting like a teenager. He's a prisoner, Serena, a prisoner, and you're losing your mind, she told herself. But no internal scolding could quiet the desire. The next day, she dragged herself down the prison corridor, grumpy and exhausted. She was ready for a gray, uneventful day when a short knock came at the office door. Before she could respond, he entered. Ethan. Her body reacted before her mind. Her heart raced, air caught in her chest. He was there, with the same insolent smile, as if he had every right to enter a space that, theoretically, should have been neutral and controlled. Late, huh? He said, closing the door behind him. Serena's eyes widened, too surprised to feign indifference. What do you think you're doing? She asked, voice firm but loaded with contained anger. Sorry. Ethan raised his hands theatrically, as if surrendering, but my schedule is limited. I can't always do what I want. She crossed her arms, trying to compose herself. Still seated, she glanced at the papers on the desk. So that was the plan. Leave me waiting. Is that what you wanted? He stepped closer, smiling as if savoring every word. I wanted to see this face. He leaned over the desk, looking down at her. You look sexy when you're mad. Serena scoffed, turning her face away, but couldn't hide the small laugh that escaped. Anger mixed with something dangerous. Something growing that pulled her toward him like a magnet. Ethan leaned in further, calmly using his hand to turn her face back to him. His eyes were close, intense, and there was a glint of audacity mixed with desire. Still mad? He asked, almost whispering. Serena didn't answer. She just stared, trying to maintain a barrier, but when she opened her mouth to speak, she had no chance. Ethan pulled her toward him, making her sit on the desk, and his lips found hers. The initial shock was like fire, a hungry, urgent kiss. Serena felt her body lose resistance, yielding to the touch, his hands gripping her waist as if claiming a forbidden territory. She responded, hesitant at first, then plunging in with the same veracity, as if all her days of restraint exploded in that instant. The kiss tasted of danger, wet, deep, a shock of ragged breaths. Her heart pounded in her chest, her entire body vibrating as if made solely for that moment. When Ethan slid his lips to her neck, Serena gasped, pulling his hair in a helpless attempt at control. Time seemed suspended, but reality returned with a sharp knock on the door. Serena's eyes widened, pushing him slightly, her heart still racing. Both were breathing heavily, lips flushed, bodies pressed together as if unwilling to let go. Ethan rested his forehead against hers for a second, smiling between short breaths. This isn't over, he said softly, like a promise. Serena swallowed hard, trying to organize her thoughts. He pulled away slowly, but before reaching the door, he turned to her. Send me an email, another name, anything. I want to talk to you. His voice was firm, almost a command, but filled with something more, a desire for continuation. She remained frozen, astonished, watching him disappear through the door with the same insolent calm with which he had entered, alone in the room. Serena sank back into the chair, her body still trembling. She touched her own lips, trying to understand what had just happened. The weight of guilt and lucidity collided within her, but the memory of the kiss, the strength of his hands, the intensity with which he had consumed her, that memory left her ungrounded. She knew she had crossed a line that could never be erased, and yet, deep down, the only thing she wanted was to cross it again. The next day, Serena did something she had never imagined doing. She created a new email account, with a different last name, something that couldn't be easily traced. The cursor blinked on the blank screen, almost daring her, asking if she was sure about the madness she was about to dive into. She took a deep breath and typed, I want to know more about you. Simple, direct, enough to start what shouldn't have a beginning. When the reply arrived, her whole body shivered. Ethan had written just a few lines, but each word seemed to penetrate the cold barrier of the prison walls and reach her directly. He shared bits of his childhood. He spoke of a poor neighborhood, the streets where he grew up, the choices he never truly had. There were no compromising details. Meals were monitored, and he knew it, but even so, he painted a raw, honest picture. He told of the first time he held a gun, not with pride, but with the weight of someone who knew it was this or nothing. He explained how limited his options were, that survival in itself was a victory. Serena read each line slowly, almost savoring the subtext. What surprised her most was that, amidst the harshness of his stories, he described small memories, the smell of bread from a corner bakery, afternoons playing ball with friends long gone, the feeling of riding a bike until a tire punctured and she had to push it home. Trivial things, details that, for someone free, would seem inconsequential, almost silly, but for them, separated by bars and constant surveillance, those fragments were treasures. Serena realized she was smiling alone at the screen. At the same time, she felt a tightening in her chest. She was stepping into territory where each step pulled her further from reason. Still, she replied. She told him about her own childhood, carefully choosing what to reveal. She wrote about the house she grew up in, the dog she had as a teenager, the fear she felt when her father took too long to return from police work and her mother remained silently watching the clock. She shared how she loved to read secretly in her room, diving into fantasy worlds to escape the rigidity of real life. And so it began. What was meant to be a quick vent turned into a habit. At night, tired from college or her internship, Serena would sit at the computer and write long, almost daily emails, unaware of how much of herself she was revealing. Ethan, in turn, always responded, not always with intense stories, sometimes describing what he would eat if he were free, like a plate of lasagna or a cold soda. Other times he wrote of missing the wind on his face, wandering aimlessly, or seeing the sea. Serena laughed at some of his replies, became emotional at others. She began to eagerly anticipate the notification of a new message in her inbox, like a teenager in her first forbidden romance. Time passed differently when she was connected to him. Hours slipped by unnoticed, until she found herself awake in the early morning, rereading his messages for the third time. Her heart raced with every line, as if the words carried the touch she could not have, the presence she could not claim. During the week, in-person encounters became rare, which only intensified the written exchange. Serena didn't know when she would see him again, and that uncertainty kept her in a constant state of anticipation. Each day felt like a silent wait, a countdown with no set date. Curiously, this waiting began to give her something she hadn't felt in a long time, a strange excitement, an inner spark that made her wake up with energy, observe her surroundings more closely, as if life had gained a new color. She knew it was wrong. She knew she was playing with fire. But, for the first time in years, she felt alive. Ethan had that power. Even miles away, separated by walls, bars, surveillance in different worlds, he could reach her. A single sentence written in the middle of the night was enough to make her chest vibrate in a way no college classmate, no casual meeting, had ever done. There was latent danger in all of this, of course, but Serena, immersed in the digital letters, didn't want to think about tomorrow. She only wanted to savor that clandestine present. Like drinking water hidden in the middle of a desert, each email was an unspoken promise. A bond growing, invisible but resilient, a reminder that, even where it shouldn't exist, something was being born. And Serena, against every rule that had always guided her life, allowed herself to be carried away. Time had dragged like never before. For Serena, every day away from him felt like an endless desert, filled with silences that couldn't be filled even with the long emails they exchanged. When he finally signaled they would see each other again, her body responded before her mind, her heart raced, her hands trembled, and her stomach twisted as if she were about to commit a crime. When the door opened, it was as if the thin air of the room had exploded. He entered, and his gaze, that brown eyes that seemed to pierce everything, found hers in seconds. There were no words, no pause. Serena didn't think. She simply rose from her chair, and when he approached, their bodies collided in an inevitable shock. Their lips met with a fierce urgency, as if all the days of waiting had been stored up for that instant. He held her tightly by the waist, pulling her against him, and Serena felt every tense muscle pressing into her body. The kiss was intense, hungry, a plea and an invasion at the same time. His tongue explored hers with raw desire, and she responded without restraint. Lost in the whirlwind of heat that enveloped them, his hands traveled along her back, moving slowly, almost reverently, until they reached her neck. When he tangled his fingers in her hair, gently tugging, a shiver ran down Serena's spine, leaving her breathless. Panting, she clutched his shoulders, feeling the hardness of his muscles, the solidity of someone who was both threat and refuge. There was no room for words, only the sound of wet kisses, uneven breaths, and a heart hammering like a war drum. He lifted her, placing her on the table. Serena gasped as the cold surface contrasted with the heat of her burning skin. Ethan positioned himself between her legs, and the contact made the entire world disappear. His hands slid along her thighs, pressing lightly, as if he wanted to memorize every curve, every texture. She pulled him closer, unable to endure even the smallest remaining distance. It was forbidden, insane, but in that moment nothing else mattered. No rules, no walls, no weight of the law. Only the two of them, trapped in a trance stronger than reason. He broke the kiss only to descend to her neck, biting lightly, eliciting a staggered sigh from Serena. His mouth left invisible marks that burned like fire. She arched her body, surrendering, feeling his teeth graze her skin, followed by the soft press of his tongue. Silent apology. "Ethan," she murmured, unsure if it was a plea or a confession. He lifted his face and fixed her with his heavy, desire-filled eyes. He held her chin, forcing her to look at him. There was no longer his usual sarcasm, no ironic smile he always carried. Something different, hard, real. Serena tried to speak, but her words came fragmented. This is madness. We can't." He didn't pull away. His gaze bound her like invisible chains. Finally, after a few seconds that seemed eternal, he said, his voice hoarse and firm, "Madness is staying away from you." Serena's chest tightened. She laughed awkwardly, as she always did when about to lose control. It's agonizing, she confessed, still short of breath. Being without you, not having you near. She expected him to reply with sarcasm, maybe a sharp joke as he always did, but Eitan remained silent. He just looked at her, serious, intense, as if searching within her for something she didn't even know she possessed. It's worse for me, he finally said. You at least have freedom. Serena froze. She had never heard that tone from him. It wasn't provocation. It wasn't a game. It was pain, a truth cutting through everything, exposing a vulnerability he never showed. She swallowed hard, feeling a wave of courage or perhaps madness rise within her. What good is freedom if the man I desire most isn't with me? The words escaped before she could control them. In the instant she realized what she had said, her heart raced even faster, as if it would stop. Ethan didn't respond, but his eyes shone with something wild, a raw desire that seemed dangerous. He pulled her back to himself and kissed her with a burning fury. As if a declaration had shattered the last barriers, the kiss was no longer hurried like the first. It was deeper, more possessive, as if each movement of tongue and bite was a mark, a promise etched onto the skin. Serena moaned softly against his mouth, feeling both whole and lost at the same time. Time, however, was cruel. Soon the key turned on the outside, reminding them that the world wouldn't allow this moment to last forever. Ethan pulled back slowly, breathing heavily. But, unlike all the other times, he didn't carry the confident smile, the posture of someone always in control. He looked at her with a weight in his eyes that left her breathless. It was pain, pain at having to leave, pain at leaving her alone, as if something had been born in that room that didn't belong to bars but was condemned by reality. Serena remained seated on the table, still panting, her lips throbbing from the kiss. She said nothing. There weren't enough words to translate what she felt. He turned slowly, walked to the door, but before leaving, cast one last look, not of victory, nor of provocation. It was a look that hurt, a look that said, if he could, he would stay. And then he was gone. Silence returned to dominate the room. But Serena knew nothing would ever be the same. The archive room was silent. Piles of folders and documents formed a maze of paper, and the smell of yellowed pages mixed with disinfectant made the air almost suffocating. It was here, in this forgotten space, that the improbable happened, where she and he stole minutes the world would never allow. That afternoon, however, she didn't want just another meeting. She carried burning questions in her chest, doubts that had become too heavy to hide. He entered without a sound, as he always did, a firm step, eyes half closed, body commanding the space as if there were no bars or walls. Seeing her, he smiled faintly, the same smile that unraveled her. But this time, she didn't yield. I need to ask you something, she said, closing the folder she pretended to read. Her voice was firm, but inside, her heart pounded. He raised his eyebrows, curious, approaching the table where she leaned. What is it? She took a deep breath. What is there between us? Is it just power, just the fascination of the forbidden, or is it something more? She expected mockery, the ironic laugh he used to mask any weakness, but for the first time, there was no laughter. He looked at her silently, his eyes burning like embers, until he stepped even closer. You still don't realize. His voice came out low, almost hoarse. It's obvious that I feel something for you. The words struck like a blow and a relief at the same time. She averted her gaze, trying to regain composure, but there was another question, the most painful of all. In your case, she ventured, her voice almost failing. Is there any chance you'll get out of here before? He sighed, his fingers drumming on the wood of the table. They've tried everything. Lawyers, appeals, but you know how it works. She said nothing. She kept the words to herself until, days later, she couldn't resist. She sought, in secret, an outside lawyer. She didn't want opinions from acquaintances, didn't want anyone who could recognize his name and measure the words. She wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered. She explained the case as if it was someone else's life, and she received, without anesthesia, the sentence she didn't want to hear. There are no loopholes. The lawyer spoke without emotion. He still has, at minimum, 10 years left. 10 years. A whole decade. The weight of those 2 words crushed her. She left the office with shaky legs, her eyes dry from holding back tears. 10 years of hidden meetings, monitored letters, desires interrupted by closing doors. 10 years without a future. When she returned to the archive room, he was already waiting. The same place, the same walls, but everything felt different, tighter, harsher. She dropped the folder on the table and faced him. I looked into your case. He narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening. You didn't trust me. It's not that. Her voice faltered. I needed to know. I needed certainty. And what did you find out? She closed her eyes for a moment before revealing the truth, that you still have at least 10 years here. The silence was sharp. He placed his hands on the table, lowering his head for a few seconds. When he looked back at her, his eyes held a shadow she had never seen before. 10 years. She felt her throat burn. 10 years is a long time. He stepped closer, so near that she could feel his body heat, though they dared not touch immediately. Don't say that. His voice was intense, almost a plea. We'll find a way, but at what cost? She counted, tears welling up. 10 years of my life living on crumbs, secret meetings, letters cut by censorship. 10 years without knowing if, when you get out, we'll still be the same. Finally, he reached out and lightly touched her fingers, as if that simple gesture could sustain everything that connected them. It's not just you waiting. I waited. Every day in here is torture because I know you're out there. But if you want to give up, I won't stop you. Tears escaped, hot and silent. I don't know if I have the strength for this, she confessed, almost in a whisper. Wanting you consumes me. It's like living between desire and despair. And if my father finds out, She stopped, afraid to continue. He looked at her, and there was as much desire as there was pain in that gaze. Then answer me. Is it worth it or not? She swallowed hard, chest heavy. She wanted to say yes, that everything was worth it. But the words didn't come. I just know it hurts, she murmured. He closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. When he opened them, he was different. Not the confident man who always dominated the room. Just someone trapped, clinging to the little he had. The distant sound of prison routine reminded them that their time was running out. She straightened the papers on the table, trying to disguise her red eyes. He didn't try to smile, didn't cast the usual look of superiority. He simply stepped back, weighed down by leaving behind what he most desired. Before leaving, he said only, "It doesn't matter how long it takes. I will think of you every day." She didn't respond. She just kept the sound of his voice, knowing it might be the last time she could still believe in the after. When he exited through the door, the room seemed to shrink. Alone among the piles of papers, she finally cried like she hadn't cried in front of him. The shock came in the form of a midnight interruption. The phone rang in the middle of the night, displaying the department's number, and it was her father's chief on the line. It didn't take long for the house, always so contained, to become the stage for a storm. Her father burst into Serena's room like a commander who had lost his composure, his face red, his voice sharp, each word forged into steel. "This is unacceptable," he repeated, while her mother tried in vain to calm him. Nervous footsteps echoed across the room. Chairs toppled here and there, the light glaring too brightly as if exposing secrets that could no longer be ignored. Serena stood small amidst that fury, a mix of fear, shame, and betrayal. Her hands trembled, but her voice emerged before she could retreat. "I didn't hide anything out of malice," she said, and it felt like opening a wound. "I know what I did. I know it's wrong, Dad, but I don't know how to explain." Her mother, pale, clutched the edges of a handkerchief, eyes glistening. She tried to intervene, whispering for calm, for the argument not to take irreversible paths. But her father's voice was a tide. Every phrase he unleashed seemed to shrink the house. The walls listened, the paintings watched, all registering the imperative tone of the man who had worn the uniform for so long. "You will tell me now how you could," he demanded, fingers digging into the arm of the sofa. "A police officer's daughter, raised to respect the law, and you come to tell me you're involved with a criminal, a convicted man." Serena felt the words like blades. She didn't try to hide anything in that explosion. She told him, in a fragile voice, about the stolen visits, the emails, the kiss that had left her breathless. She spoke of fear and desire, of letters crossing the night, of how it had made her alive and yet hollowed her out. With every sentence, her father's face hardened. Her mother wept quietly. The house, once a sanctuary of order, transformed into a courtroom. "You have 1 year left in college." Her father's voice was almost a whisper, as if decreeing reality. "And I will not allow this scandal to destroy everything. From today, you will no longer set foot in that prison. Understood? And I will place people to monitor where you go. I don't want news of visits, of calls. Nothing." Those words fell like a sentence. Serena tried to argue practically. Financial dependency. The year she had left, the life she had, fragile though it was, built. But there was no dialogue when a man was consumed by a mixture of shame and paternal fear. Her father, with contacts everywhere, had already activated the network. He knew people, wielded influence, knew how to turn fear into action. Within hours, the presence that had once surveilled the family internally became external surveillance. Intercepted messages, recorded calls, cars discreetly passing by the street. The feeling that dominated Serena was powerlessness. She felt bound, wanting to disappear, pack her bags, run, remove her body from there. She thought of vanishing, starting another life far from the surname, accepting any job, putting distance between herself and the prison her father had now turned into a definitive wall. But the bills, the scholarship that didn't cover everything, a semester about to end, these were anchors too heavy to cut in an instant. Months passed, and Serena received an unexpected message on her phone. It was the prison psychologist, a request to meet at a discreet cafe, away from her family's eyes. The mere suggestion brought a breath of air. They met at a table near the window. The woman, with few wrinkles and a non-judgmental smile, seemed to read Serena effortlessly. She listened without interrupting as Serena recounted the fight, the surveillance, the despair of not knowing how to move forward. The psychologist offered a coffee, a small distraction, then pulled a sealed envelope from her pocket. "He asked me to give this to you when I saw that you needed it," she said bluntly, Serena opened the envelope with the tips of her fingers, as if touching something too fragile. Inside was a handwritten letter, Ethan's handwriting uneven, firm in some places, rounded in others. Her eyes trembled as she read. Serena, I never know exactly where to begin. Here words take on a different taste. They are the only world I can send to you without it becoming news. I don't have apologies that erase what I've done. I know my mistakes are many and weigh like unbreakable chains. I was born where choices weren't taught, only paths laid out by necessity. I don't ask you to understand me, only to know that what I feel for you is not part of a game. I've never felt anything like this before. I dreamed, for a time, of redemption, of paying for what I did and somehow earning a clean day of freedom. But I realized, alone, that perhaps this isn't possible, at least not the way I imagined. If I have a request, it's that you live. I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for something already doomed. I see you free outside these walls. I want you to be whole, to laugh without checking the clock, not waiting for someone who may never give you everything. With a pain too large for a sheet of paper, Brian, the words hit Serena with the force of a gentle fist. Reading them while her mother and father schemed in the real world with their protections and sentences, created a complex ache, the certainty that the man wanted her well, and yet could not offer it. The psychologist remained silent for a few seconds, then spoke, in a tone that mixed experience and professional tenderness. Sometimes love is knowing how to let go. It's the cruelest lesson for those outside and for those inside. Serena held her breath. The letter was at once a gift and a farewell, a closure coming from inside the bars, pointing to the only decent exit, life beyond them. Brian's words were not abandonment. They were an honest renunciation, an acknowledgement of impossibility. Leaving the cafe, the city seemed harsher. She carried the letter against her chest as if it were a relic of a time that perhaps had been the only one not truly hers. She knew her father would act, that the surveillance would intensify, that with every step eyes would line the street. She also knew that, in a gesture of compassion or cowardice, Sithan had invited her to live, to be free. In the car back home, alone, Serena let the tears flow. They weren't only for loss, they were paradoxical relief. Someone she loved asked her to set herself free. She understood, for the first time with clarity, that his confession was not just a declaration of feeling, but a final act of care. And as her face wet the folded letter in her lap, she knew that the life ahead would demand hard choices, choices that, however painful, now began to take shape.